Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 quick match gameplay. This time around, I am playing as the Wood Elves against the Lizardmen on the map Athel Tamara. So right off the bat, against Lizardmen, of course, most of their units do have decent armor. Even their large units, actually their monstrous units, and even most of their infantry, with the exception of Skinks, has pretty good armor. And they can potentially bring a decent amount of shooting. So I kind of wanted to just build a composition that could hopefully counteract them. And so yeah. So for my lord, I did decide to bring a Glady. Nothing fancy on her, the usual Prey of Anathrema and Arrow of Kurnus. She is, of course, very mobile. Doesn't have the greatest survivability, especially now that the Potion of Healing has been removed. But she can snipe away at enemies and pick off models, generally, with fairly high missile damage, good range, all that sort of stuff. So pretty powerful lord, and pretty cheap at that. Alongside her, I did bring a single Branch Wraith. The Branch Wraith is almost a must-pick for me. I'll bring it in almost every single composition, and that is because of one specific ability, and that is Call of the Woods. This ability is an improvement to melee attack in a small radius, but +5 melee attack is actually pretty significant, especially when you're dealing with fairly low melee attack units, such as Eternal Guard, and generally these are the units that your army is largely going to be composed of, because they are, of course, the cheap line infantry for Wood Elves. On the Branch Wraith, I did bring the Earthblood. I did bring Earthblood as well as the Withering. I decided not to bring the Penumbral Pendulum because I don't really think it's worth it against Lizardmen, because of course they have very high HP per model, so it's not really going to do that much damage per model against them. For my front line, of course, as mentioned before, I did bring a bunch of Eternal Guard. I do have 2 unshielded Eternal Guard on the ends, and my center is composed of 3 Eternal Guard with shields. These guys, of course, do have actually significantly better melee defense. These guys were slightly veteraned up, but it's actually 44 versus 36 usually. So these guys have very, very high melee defense, which will make them a very tough nut to crack for the Lizardmen, who actually don't have very good melee attack for most part. And that definitely makes them pretty nifty. Behind them, 2 units of War Dancers, vanilla ones. War Dancers do have a bonus against infantry, and despite not having very good armor, they do have physical resistance. Lizardmen don't really have much in the way of magical damage, and these guys do have a bonus against infantry, so even against Saurus Warriors, they'll chop them up pretty well, and they'll actually dice through the Skinks very, very quickly, and that's kind of what I'm bringing them there for, just to eliminate chaff as quickly as possible. Behind that, my main shooting contingent, 3 units of Glade Guard with Starfire Shafts. These guys, of course, just there to deal with heavily armored units that I can't really get at with my infantry. And just to shoot down, say, if they have Krokgar, or if they have Mazdamundi, or if they have the Bastildons with solar engines, anything like that, these guys are there to eliminate it very, very quickly with their high missile damage. And on the flanks, I do have 2 units of War Dancers with Azure Spear. They're, of course, there to counter all the big, large nasties that Lizardmen can bring. Oftentimes, you will see the rampaging prone, you'll often see cold ones, and against them, just the feral ones, and against those, War Dancers with Azure Spear is really good. Finally, up in the air, instead of bringing the usual cavalry contingent of 2 Wild Riders, I did bring 2 Hawk Riders. These guys are a little cheaper. They definitely don't have comparable melee stats, but they do have a hefty charge bonus of 40, and they do have a armor piercing with a weapon strength of 45. So these guys on the charge can actually do quite a bit of damage in melee, and they can poke away at enemies with their missile damage. Throwing things into kind of full speed here. Going to go over my opponent's composition real quick. My opponent did decide to play a little cautiously. Play an interesting strat, I suppose. He did bring Krokgar as well as a Sarskar veteran. Though interestingly enough, neither of them are mounted on the Carnosaurs. They're actually both, I do believe, mounted on cold ones. It might be a horned one for Krokgar. It's a little hard to tell among the trees here. I can't even find Krokgar. There he is. He might be on a horned one. And no, it looks like they're all actually. Oh no, he is on a horned one. So I opponent to bring a bunch of cold ones, Spear Riders over here in the cold one riders, cold one Spear Riders. Cold one Spear Riders will absolutely trounce Wild Riders in close quarters because they do have decent armor. They have a bonus against large, and they'll just tear through Wild Riders really quickly. That was part of the reason why I decided not to bother with Wild Riders, because there's not that much on the Lizardman roster that Wild Riders are good against. The only unit I was a little worried about was the Chameleon Skinks, and for that I just decided I'd have to fight them with the Hawk Riders if needed. For his front line, my opponent did bring a whole bunch of Skink cohorts. These guys are terrible infantry, but they are dirt cheap, and they can soak up my initial charge, my initial damage, and my initial shooting pretty effectively. Behind that, 2 units of Chameleon Skinks. These guys have atrocious range, but they do have 40% missile resist, which means not even my magic is going to bypass it like it does with, say, Skaven Skirmishers. They do cause poison damage in melee and range, which makes them actually fairly decent in close quarters if they have to defend themselves. and they're just very mobile. I can't catch them with my infantry, especially because I'll be poisoning them, so these guys are pretty potent. Then, my opponent did bring a Feral Bastillodon. This is mostly just a filler unit, definitely dirt cheap, can cause a lot of disruption, but it's very, very easy to rampage because it is a feral unit. Behind that, really, the main kind of actual damage component of my opponent's infantry, 2 units of Star Warriors with shields, shields of course being practically mandatory against Wood Elves, and then a single unit of Temple Guard, just to kind of stiffen things up. So throwing things into full gear, I am kind of poking around with the Hawk Riders, just seeing if I can sneak in some shots against my opponent, but I don't want to waste my ammo on the skink cohorts. I don't want to waste it on chameleon skinks because I can't really do much damage. The Hawk Riders do have very strong, they do have very high missile damage, but there's only 18 of them. So, and against, say, chameleon skinks with a 40% missile resist, they're not going to do very much. So what I do decide to do is just focus down the Feral Bastillodon, try to force out that rampage, make it attack me, just force out a move. I've already knocked off about a sixth of its HP within a handful of volleys, and I'm just focusing it down as hard as I can. Over here to the front line, my Eternal Guard is clashing with the skink cohorts, though of course the Temple Guard is immediately hot on their tail and pushing in. Over here you can see the War Dancers are absolutely shredding through the skink cohort in a very, very quick manner. Over here, the Feral Bastillodon does plow into the Eternal Guard with shields. Now, Eternal Guard is the only Wood Elf infantry, and this is actually something important to keep in mind when you're playing against Wood Elves. Wood Elves have almost complete immunity to psychology as far as their front line is concerned, and even as far as their flankers are concerned. Really, their only units that don't have much immunity to psychology are Glade Guards, so you should never really count on getting terror outs against Wood Elves, even less so than Dwarves, in my opinion. But Eternal Guard is susceptible to terror, so potentially if my opponent can disrupt them and cause quite a bit of hurt to him, this Feral Bastillodon could induce a terror out, and I'm definitely a little worried about that. I'm pushing in my War Dancers. I'm trying to snipe down this Feral Bastillodon as quick as I can with arrow fire. It does rout, and then from there on out, the War Dancers will hopefully take over and be able to dice through these skink cohorts. Over here, I'm pushing up my War Dancers with Azrai Spear, but I do halt them just shy of pushing in, and I have spotted my opponent's Cold One Riders. So I'm positioning these War Dancers out here. They are taking some nasty missile fire from the chameleon skinks. There's not much I can do about that. I could have popped their ability. Definitely a mistake here. They do have an ability that reduces incoming missile damage, and I made a mistake by not popping that. Over here, you can see Pterodons do a bombing run of my infantry unit here, because they are a bit clumped up, and I do start kind of sniping away at them with the Hawk Riders, who actually do decent damage, and these guys, while they do have some missile resist, are just not very tanky against arrow or archery fire. Now I'm trying to get my second unit of Azrai Spears here, just positioned to soak up the attack, and what I do is I drop a Prey of Anathrema on a unit of Cold One Spear Riders, rather than bothering with, say, Krokgar or the Starscar Veteran, because there's a good chance that if I catch these guys, I will be able to rout them off. If I hit Krokgar, he's going to take a lot of damage, but he's not going to rout off. He's going to stick around and be a nuisance. Over here, the Cold One Spear Riders have plowed into my Eternal Guard, but Eternal Guard is a terrible target for him. Eternal Guard with his high AP, decent melee defense, of course their bonus against large won't work against them. It's just absolutely brutal. Over here, these poor Cold One Spear Riders are practically annihilated, and although Krokgar does kind of try to sneak around here, and he will actually get into my Glade Guard just a little bit, I'm going to be able to just surround both him and Krokgar. You can see that awesome leaping attack there for the Starscar Veteran. I will be able to just surround them, bog them down. Glade Guard does not have terrible melee defense, and quite frankly, in this sort of situation, I'd rather just bog them down and kill them. Over here on the front line, you can see I'm dropping some Earthblood, just trying to keep these guys in the fray. This Feral Bastillodon has come back for about the third time at this point. Over here on the flank, my Azrai Spears, one of the units, has pushed in just to help mop up these Cold One Riders. I'm taking some heavy fire from these annoying chameleon skinks, and that's making things very difficult. You can see this Arrow of Kurnus gets completely wasted on the chameleon skinks. I should have definitely not done that. Over here, though, you can see I've thrown my Hawk Riders into the fray against Krokgar, and you can see how fast he's actually dropping. Between the War Dancers with Azrai Spears and the Hawk Riders, who are hitting him so very heavily, he's dropping pretty quickly on his HP pool, and he's definitely struggling at this point. I'm trying to get some shots in with the Glade Guard, but they're definitely struggling to get shots in. They're just not, because he's on a low mount. He's on the horned one instead of the big old Carnosaur. It's actually on Grimlock. It's actually hard for him to shoot him. Over here, this flank is folding pretty badly, and the center is almost completely buckled. The only thing keeping things together here is really the Branch Wraith, because both Eternal Guard with shields are practically annihilated, and soon they are going to rout. On the right flank, though, I'm definitely winning, and the rear guard and the whole flanking operation my opponent tried to pull off has failed pretty miserably. He's actually about to lose Krokgar. Well, Krokgar's routed. His Starscar Veteran did retreat, which is good for him, but he's not his commander, and I should be able to now isolate and assassinate Krokgar. I do drop a Prey of Anathrema on these Star Warriors just to try to shoot them down a little bit more before they can break through. And I am now trying to just mob good old Krokgar down here and swamp him with Hawk Riders, keep the Azrai Spears on him, get my Lord on him, and just assassinate him as quick as I can. Over here on the flank, I have unfortunately allowed my War Dancers with Azrai Spears and these guys to all overextend in a pursuit of the Cold Ones, but shortly I'm going to be able to recover them and pull them back. You can see the Temple Guard here is still pretty healthy in the HP department. And of course, the Starscar Veteran is just tying down these Glade Guard with Starfire Shafts. I'm no longer able to defend them. I could if I decided to just leave Krokgar to go, but I want to assassinate Krokgar and get rid of him, get him off the field. Over here, Cold One Spear Riders are charging in, but the Eternal Guard is very, very high leadership. War Dancers are immune to psychology. These guys are going to have a very rough time doing much of anything to them. The Chameleon Skinks do retreat. The Feral Bastiladon is finally shattered at its last dregs of HP. Croc Guard does go down. And at this point, my opponent is down to just his Chameleon Skinks, who I'm trying to snipe away with. That's a much better Arrow of Kurnus, though still nothing amazing. At this point, though, my opponent is down to his Sarge Warriors, Temple Guard, and a handful of Cold One Spear Riders. But Cold One Spear Riders are not going to do well, not even against Eternal Guard, much less say the Azrai Spears. And now I'm trying to focus down his Pterodons with Fire Leech Bolas, which I do think was a little bit of an interesting pick. They're very susceptible to arrow fire. You can see they're getting just completely massacred. Of course, Wood Elves do have pretty loose formations as well, though I suppose the fire damage could potentially be really potent against, for example, Dryads if they clump up. But now you can see the Fire Leech Bolas are definitely having a rough time of it. They're getting sniped away at. My Lord is sniping them, and now my opponent's army does shatter and rout, giving me a perfect victory. So definitely a bit of a tight match, but I do think this is a pretty functional Wood Elf build against the Lizardmen. Against Lizardmen, you generally want some armor piercing, because most of their units do have armor. You don't necessarily have to mass armor piercing, because both Skinks and Sarge Warriors are fairly common, and neither of those have the greatest of armor, but nonetheless armor piercing is nice. It's important to keep in mind if you're playing against Wood Elves. Now, this wasn't really something I don't think my opponent was going for terror routes, but it is something important to keep in mind when going against Wood Elves, is that you're not likely to get a psychological break. That Feral Bastiladon raging through my line, for example, if I was playing as Empire, or if I was playing as High Elves even, there's actually a decent chance your infantry, if they're getting disrupted enough and taking a lot enough damage on the charge save from the Sarge Warriors and stuff, they will rout. But with Wood Elves, especially, their Eternal Guard has massive leadership, which makes it hard to induce that terror rout, and War Dancers are immune to psychology, so you don't really have to worry about that. That's definitely one of those nifty things about Wood Elves, and definitely something you should look out for. The Hawk Riders, definitely, I was pretty impressed. I was really happy about how they performed. They definitely helped me snipe down Croc Gar. They helped me defend. They were helping poke at my opponent's troops. They're definitely not a bad unit, in my opinion. They're just not the same kind of functionality as Hawk Riders. But I think that against Lizardmen, where Wild Riders are not necessarily the best choice, just because Spear Riders shut them down so hard, and the Lizardmen kind of tear through Wild Riders fairly effectively, and there's not really much of a backline for them to go after. In my opinion, it's generally it's honestly not a bad choice to say bring Hawk Riders instead. But yeah, not much else to say. Eternal Guard performed about as well as expected. The War Dancers did really well, just dicing through the Skinks, which is what that brought them for. The other War Dancers did great, just shutting down Croc Gar and his Cav buddies. And the Starfire Shafts sniped down the Bastiladon, so not much else that can be expected. For my opponent's comp, definitely I think a bit of an interesting pick is the Fire Leech Bolas. Obviously, fire damage can be potent again if your Wood Elf enemy decides to bring Treemen or Treekin or anything like that. But in my opinion, they're not that great. Treemen, Treekin, and Dryads aren't that great against Sarge Warriors or Lizards, because none of them have armor. Because none of them have armor piercing, and of course Durthu, while Durthu would probably be decent, he's very expensive, and honestly, explosive damage is not going to do very much to Durthu. You need to be getting direct hits with some sort of fire damage. But otherwise, I do think this is a pretty cool comp. The idea of using Croc Gar and Sarge Gar Veteran on cold ones rather than going for Grimlock, which a lot of people seem to do, was actually pretty cool, I think, and definitely a bit of an interesting take on it. Definitely interesting to see that. Definitely good again to my opponent. You can see the Sarge Warrior did great damage. Still the Temple Guard. And yeah, good game. I do hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below for additional content. If you have any comments, criticism, any questions about Total War Warhammer or anything like that, be sure to post them down in the comments, and I will respond as soon as I can. As usual, guys, I do appreciate you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.